This Side of Paradise, the classic novel by F. Scott Fitzgerald. Part 2. The Egotist Down. Amory's 2 years at St. Regis, though in turn painful and triumphant, had as little real significance in his own life as the American prep school, crushed as it is under the heel of the universities, has to American life in general. We have no Eton to create the self-consciousness of a governing class. We have, instead, clean, flaccid, and innocuous preparatory schools. He went all wrong at the start, was generally considered both conceited and arrogant, and universally detested. He played football intensely, alternating a reckless brilliancy with a tendency to keep himself as safe from hazard as decency would permit. In a wild panic, he backed out of a fight with a boy his own size, to a chorus of scorn, and a week later, in desperation, picked a battle with another boy very much bigger, from which he emerged badly beaten, but rather proud of himself. He was resentful against all those in authority over him, and this, combined with a lazy indifference toward his work, exasperated every master in school. He grew discouraged and imagined himself a pariah, took to sulking in corners and reading after lights. With a dread of being alone, he attached a few friends, but since they were not among the elite of the school, he used them simply as mirrors of himself, audiences before which he might do that posing absolutely essential to him. He was unbearably lonely, desperately unhappy. There were some few grains of comfort. Whenever Amory was submerged, his vanity was the last part to go below the surface, so he could still enjoy a comfortable glow when Wookie, the deaf old housekeeper, told him that he was the best-looking boy she had ever seen. It had pleased him to be the lightest and youngest man on the first football squad. It pleased him when Dr. Dougal told him at the end of a heated conference that he could, if he wished, get the best marks in school. But Dr. Dougal was wrong. It was temperamentally impossible for Amory to get the best marks in school. Miserable, confined to bounds, unpopular with both faculty and students. That was Amory's first term. But at Christmas, he had returned to Minneapolis, tight-lipped and strangely jubilant. "Oh, I was sort of fresh at first," he told Frog Parker patronizingly. "But I got along fine. Lightest man on the squad. You ought to go away to school, Froggy. It's great stuff." Incident of the well-meaning professor. On the last night of his first term, Mr. Margotson, the senior master, sent word to study hall that Amory was to come to his room at 9. Amory suspected that advice was forthcoming, but he determined to be courteous, because this Mr. Margotson had been kindly disposed toward him. His summoner received him gravely and motioned him to a chair. He hemmed several times and looked consciously kind, as a man will when he knows he's on delicate ground. "Amory," he began, "I've sent for you on a personal matter." "Yes, sir." "I've noticed you this year, and I like you. I think you have in you the makings of a very good man." "Yes, sir," Amory managed to articulate. He hated having people talk as if he were an admitted failure. "But I've noticed," continued the older man blindly, "that you're not very popular with the boys." "No, sir." Amory licked his lips. "Ah, I thought you might not understand exactly what it was they objected to. I'm going to tell you because I believe, that when a boy knows his difficulties, he's better able to cope with them, to conform to what others expect of him." He hemmed again with delicate reticence and continued, "They seem to think that you're, rather too fresh." Amory could stand no more. He rose from his chair, scarcely controlling his voice when he spoke. "I know. Oh, don't you suppose I know?" His voice rose. "I know what they think. Do you suppose you have to tell me?" He paused. I've got to go back now. Hope I'm not rude." He left the room hurriedly. In the cool air outside, as he walked to his house, he exulted in his refusal to be helped. "That damn old fool!" he cried wildly. "As if I didn't know." He decided, however, that this was a good excuse not to go back to study hall that night, so, Comfortably couched up in his room, he munched Nabiscos and finished The White Company. Incident of the Wonderful Girl. There was a bright star in February. New York burst upon him on Washington's birthday with the brilliance of a long-anticipated event. His glimpse of it as a vivid whiteness against a deep blue sky had left a picture of splendor that rivaled the dream cities in the Arabian Nights. But this time he saw it by electric light, and romance gleamed from the chariot race sign on Broadway and from the women's eyes at the Astor, where he and young Paskert from St. Regis had dinner. When they walked down the aisle of the theater, greeted by the nervous twanging and discord of untuned violins and the sensuous, heavy fragrance of paint and powder, he moved in a sphere of Epicurean delight. Everything enchanted him. The play was The Little Millionaire, with George M. Cohan. And there was one stunning young brunette who made him sit with brimming eyes in the ecstasy of watching her dance. "Oh, you, wonderful girl. What a wonderful girl you are," sang the tenor, and Amory agreed silently but passionately. "All your wonderful words thrill me through." The violin swelled and quavered on the last notes. The girl sank to a crumpled butterfly on the stage. A great burst of clapping filled the house. Oh, to fall in love like that, to the languorous magic melody of such a tune. The last scene was laid on a roof garden, and the cellos sighed to the musical moon, while light adventure and facile froth-like comedy flitted back and forth in the calcium. Amory was on fire to be an habitué of roof gardens, to meet a girl who should look like that. Better, that very girl, whose hair would be drenched with golden moonlight, while at his elbow sparkling wine was poured by an unintelligible waiter. When the curtain fell for the last time, he gave such a long sigh that the people in front of him twisted around and stared and said loud enough for him to hear, "What a remarkable-looking boy." This took his mind off the play, and he wondered if he really did seem handsome to the population of New York. Paskert and he walked in silence toward their hotel. The former was the first to speak. His uncertain 15-year-old voice broke in a melancholy strain on Amory's musings. "I'd marry that girl tonight." There was no need to ask what girl he referred to. "I'd be proud to take her home and introduce her to my people," continued Paskert. Amory was distinctly impressed. He wished he had said it instead of Paskert. It sounded so mature. "I wonder about actresses. Are they all pretty bad?" "No, sir, not by a darn sight," said the worldly youth with emphasis. "And I know that girl's as good as gold. I can tell." They wandered on, mixing in the Broadway crowd, dreaming on the music that eddied out of the cafes. New faces flashed on and off like myriad lights, pale or rouged faces, tired yet sustained by a weary excitement. Amory watched them in fascination. He was planning his life. He was going to live in New York and be known at every restaurant and cafe, wearing a dress suit from early evening to early morning, sleeping away the dull hours of the forenoon. "Yes, sir, I'd marry that girl tonight." Heroic in general tone. October of his second and last year at St. Regis's was a high point in Amory's memory. The game with Groton was played from 3 of a snappy, exhilarating afternoon far into the crisp autumnal twilight, and Amory at quarterback, exhorting in wild despair, making impossible tackles, calling signals in a voice that had diminished to a hoarse, furious whisper, yet found time to revel in the blood-stained bandage around his head and the straining, glorious heroism of plunging, crashing bodies and aching limbs. For those minutes, courage flowed like wine out of the November dusk, and he was the eternal hero, one with the sea rover on the prow of a Norse galley, one with Roland and Horatius, Sir Nigel and Ted Coy, scraped and stripped into trim and then flung by his own will into the breach, beating back the tide, hearing from afar the thunder of cheers. Finally bruised and weary, but still elusive, circling an end, twisting, changing pace, straight-arming, falling behind the Groton goal with 2 men on his legs in the only touchdown of the game. The philosophy of the slicker. From the scoffing superiority of sixth form year and success, Amory looked back with cynical wonder on his status of the year before. He was changed as completely as Amory Blaine could ever be changed. Amory plus Beatrice plus 2 years in Minneapolis. These had been his ingredients when he entered St. Regis's. But the Minneapolis years were not a thick enough overlay to conceal the Amory plus Beatrice from the ferreting eyes of a boarding school, so St. Regis's had very painfully drilled Beatrice out of him and begun to lay down new and more conventional planking on the fundamental Amory. But both St. Regis's and Amory were unconscious of the fact that this fundamental Amory had not in himself changed. Those qualities for which he had suffered, his moodiness, his tendency to pose, his laziness, and his love of playing the fool, were now taken as a matter of course, recognized eccentricities in a star quarterback, a clever actor, and the editor of the St. Regis Tatler. It puzzled him to see impressionable small boys imitating the very vanities that had not long ago been contemptible weaknesses. After the football season, he slumped into dreamy content. The night of the pre-holiday dance, he slipped away and went early to bed for the pleasure of hearing the violin music cross the grass and come surging in at his window. Many nights he lay there dreaming awake of secret cafes in Montmartre, where ivory women delved in romantic mysteries with diplomats and soldiers of fortune, while orchestras played Hungarian waltzes and the air was thick and exotic with intrigue and moonlight and adventure. In the spring, he read L'Allegro by request and was inspired to lyrical outpourings on the subject of Arcady and the pipes of Pan. He moved his bed so that the sun would wake him at dawn that he might dress and go out to the archaic swing that hung from an apple tree near the sixth form house. Seating himself in this, he would pump higher and higher until he got the effect of swinging into the wide air, into a fairyland of piping satyrs and nymphs with the faces of fair-haired girls he passed in the streets of Eastchester. As the swing reached its highest point, Arcady really lay just over the brow of a certain hill, where the brown road dwindled out of sight in a golden dot. He read voluminously all spring, the beginning of his 18th year. The Gentleman from Indiana, The New Arabian Nights, The Morals of Marcus Ordain, The Man Who Was Thursday, which he liked without understanding. Stover at Yale, that became somewhat of a textbook. Dombey and Son, because he thought he really should read better stuff. Robert Chambers, David Graham Phillips, and E. Phillips Oppenheim complete, and a scattering of Tennyson and Kipling. Of all his classwork, only L'Allegro, and some quality of rigid clarity and solid geometry stirred his languid interest. As June drew near, he felt the need of conversation to formulate his own ideas, and, to his surprise, found a co-philosopher in Rahil, the president of the sixth form. In many a talk, on the high road or lying belly down along the edge of the baseball diamond, or late at night with their cigarettes glowing in the dark, they threshed out the questions of school, and there was developed the term slicker. "Got tobacco?" whispered Rahil one night, putting his head inside the door 5 minutes after lights. "Sure. I'm coming in. Take a couple of pillows and lie in the window seat, why don't you?" Amory sat up in bed and lit a cigarette while Rahil settled for a conversation. Rahil's favorite subject was the respective futures of the sixth form, and Amory never tired of outlining them for his benefit. Ted Converse? That's easy. He'll fail his exams, tutor all summer at Harstrom's, get into chef with about 4 conditions, and flunk out in the middle of the freshman year. Then he'll go back west and raise hell for a year or so. Finally, his father will make him go into the paint business. He'll marry and have 4 sons, all boneheads. He'll always think St. Regis's spoiled him, so he'll send his sons to day school in Portland. He'll die of locomotor ataxia when he's 41, and his wife will give a baptizing stand or whatever you call it to the Presbyterian church, with his name on it. Hold up, Amory, that's too darned gloomy. How about yourself? I'm in a superior class. You are too. We're philosophers. I'm not. Sure you are. You've got a darn good head on you. But Amory knew that nothing in the abstract, no theory or generality, ever moved Rahil until he stubbed his toe upon the concrete minutiae of it. Haven't, insisted Rahil. I let people impose on me here and don't get anything out of it. I'm the prey of my friends, damn it. Do their lessons, get 'em out of trouble, pay 'em stupid summer visits, and always entertain their kid sisters. Keep my temper when they get selfish, and then they think they pay me back by voting for me and telling me I'm the big man of St. Regis's. I want to get where everybody does their own work, and I can tell people where to go. I'm tired of being nice to every poor fish in school. You're not a slicker, said Amory suddenly. A what? A slicker. What the devil's that? Well, it's something that, there's a lot of them. You're not one, and neither am I, though I am more than you are. Who is one? What makes you one? Amory considered. Why, I suppose that the sign of it is when a fellow slicks his hair back with water. Like Carstairs? Yes, sure, he's a slicker. They spent 2 evenings getting an exact definition. The slicker was good-looking or clean-looking. He had brains, social brains, that is, and he used all means on the broad path of honesty to get ahead, be popular, admired, and never in trouble. He dressed well, was particularly neat in appearance, and derived his name from the fact that his hair was inevitably worn short, soaked in water or tonic, parted in the middle, and slicked back as the current of fashion dictated. The slickers of that year had adopted tortoise-shell spectacles as badges of their slickerhood, and this made them so easy to recognize that Amory and Rahil never missed one. The slicker seemed distributed through school, always a little wiser and shrewder than his contemporaries, managing some team or other, and keeping his cleverness carefully concealed. Amory found the slicker a most valuable classification until his junior year in college, when the outline became so blurred and indeterminate that it had to be subdivided many times and became only a quality. Amory's secret ideal had all the slicker qualifications, but, in addition, courage and tremendous brains and talents. Also, Amory conceded him a bizarre streak that was quite irreconcilable to the slicker proper. This was a first real break from the hypocrisy of school tradition. The slicker was a definite element of success, differing intrinsically from the prep school big man. The slicker. 1. Clever sense of social values. 2. Dresses well. Pretends that dress is superficial, but knows that it isn't. 3. Goes into such activities as he can shine in. 4. Gets to college and is, in a worldly way, successful. 5. Hair slicked. The big man. 1. Inclined to stupidity and unconscious of social values. 2. Thinks dress is superficial and is inclined to be. Careless about it. 3. Goes out for everything from a sense of duty. 4. Gets to college and has a problematical future. Feels lost. Without his circle and always says that school days were. Happiest, after all. Goes back to school and makes speeches about what St. Regis's boys are doing. 5. Hair not slicked. Amory had decided definitely on Princeton, even though he would be the only boy entering that year from St. Regis's. Yale had a romance and glamour from the tales of Minneapolis, and St. Regis's men who had been tapped for skull and bones. But Princeton drew him most, with its atmosphere of bright colors and its alluring reputation as the pleasantest country club in America. Dwarfed by the menacing college exams, Amory's school days drifted into the past. Years afterward, when he went back to St. Regis, he seemed to have forgotten the successes of sixth form year and to be able to picture himself only as the unadjustable boy who had hurried down corridors, jeered at by his rabid contemporaries mad with common sense. Chapter 2. Spires and Gargoyles. At first, Amory noticed only the wealth of sunshine creeping across the long green swards, dancing on the leaded window panes, and swimming around the tops of spires and towers and battlemented walls. Gradually, he realized that he was really walking up University Place, self-conscious about his suitcase, developing a new tendency to glare straight ahead when he passed anyone. Several times he could have sworn that men turned to look at him critically. He wondered vaguely if there was something the matter with his clothes, and wished he had shaved that morning on the train. He felt unnecessarily stiff and awkward among these white-flanneled, bare-headed youths, who must be juniors and seniors, judging from the savoir-faire with which they strolled. He found that 12 University Place was a large, dilapidated mansion, at present apparently uninhabited, though he knew it housed usually a dozen freshmen. After a hurried skirmish with his landlady, he sallied out on a tour of exploration, but he had gone scarcely a block when he became horribly conscious that he must be the only man in town who was wearing a hat. He returned hurriedly to 12th University, left his derby, and, emerging bareheaded, loitered down Nassau Street, stopping to investigate a display of athletic photographs in a store window, including a large one of Allenby, the football captain, and next attracted by the sign "Jigger Shop" over a confectionery window. This sounded familiar, so he sauntered in and took a seat on a high stool. "Chocolate sundae," he told a colored person. "Double chocolate jigga? Anything else?" "Why, yes." "Bacon bun?" "Why, yes." He munched 4 of these, finding them of pleasing savor, and then consumed another double chocolate jigger before ease descended upon him. After a cursory inspection of the pillowcases, leather pennants, and Gibson girls that lined the walls, he left, and continued along Nassau Street with his hands in his pockets. Gradually, he was learning to distinguish between upperclassmen and entering men, even though the freshman cap would not appear until the following Monday. Those who were too obviously, too nervously at home were freshmen, for as each train brought a new contingent, it was immediately absorbed into the hatless, white-shod, book-laden throng, whose function seemed to be to drift endlessly up and down the street, emitting great clouds of smoke from brand-new pipes. By afternoon, Amory realized that now the newest arrivals were taking him for an upperclassman, and he tried conscientiously to look both pleasantly blasé and casually critical, which was as near as he could analyze the prevalent facial expression. At 5 o'clock, he felt the need of hearing his own voice, so he retreated to his house to see if anyone else had arrived. Having climbed the rickety stairs, he scrutinized his room resignedly, concluding that it was hopeless to attempt any more inspired decoration than class banners and tiger pictures. There was a tap at the door. "Come in." A slim face with gray eyes and a humorous smile appeared in the doorway. "Got a hammer?" "No, sorry. Maybe Mrs. 12 or whatever she goes by has one." The stranger advanced into the room. "You an inmate of this asylum?" Amory nodded. "Awful barn for the rent we pay." Amory had to agree that it was. "I thought of the campus," he said. "But they say there's so few freshmen that they're lost. Have to sit around and study for something to do." The gray-eyed man decided to introduce himself. "My name's Holliday." "Blaine's my name." They shook hands with the fashionable low swoop. Amory grinned. "Where'd you prep?" "Andover." "Where did you?" "St. Regis's." "Oh, did you? I had a cousin there." They discussed the cousin thoroughly, and then Holliday announced that he was to meet his brother for dinner at 6. "Come along and have a bite with us." "All right." At the Kenilworth, Amory met Byrne Holliday. He of the gray eyes was Carey, and during a limpid meal of thin soup and anemic vegetables, they stared at the other freshmen, who sat either in small groups looking very ill at ease or in large groups seeming very much at home. "I hear Commons is pretty bad," said Amory. "That's the rumor, but you've got to eat there, or pay anyways." "Crime!" "Imposition." "Oh, at Princeton you've got to swallow everything the first year. It's like a damned prep school." Amory agreed. "Lot of pep, though," he insisted. "I wouldn't have gone to Yale for $1 million." "Me either." "You going out for anything?" inquired Amory of the elder brother. "Not me. Byrne here is going out for the Prince. The Daily Princetonian, you know." "Yes, I know." "You going out for anything?" "Why, yes, I'm going to take a whack at freshman football." "Play at St. Regis's?" "Some," admitted Amory depreciatingly. but I'm getting so damned thin. You're not thin. Well, I used to be stocky last fall. Oh. After supper, they attended the movies, where Amory was fascinated by the glib comments of a man in front of him, as well as by the wild yelling and shouting. Yo-ho! Oh, honey baby, you're so big and strong, but oh, so gentle. Clinch. Oh, clinch! Kiss her. Kiss that lady, quick. Oh, A group began whistling By the Sea, and the audience took it up noisily. This was followed by an indistinguishable song that included much stamping and then by an endless, incoherent dirge. Oh, she works in a jam factory, and that may be all right. But you can't fool me, for I know damn well that she don't make jam all night. Oh! As they pushed out, giving and receiving curious impersonal glances, Amory decided that he liked the movies, wanted to enjoy them as the row of upperclassmen in front had enjoyed them, with their arms along the backs of the seats, their comments Gaelic and caustic, their attitude a mixture of critical wit and tolerant amusement. Want a sundae? I mean a jigger? Asked Carrie. Sure. They suppered heavily, and then, still sauntering, eased back to 12. Wonderful night. It's a whiz. You men going to unpack? Guess so. Come on, Byrne. Amory decided to sit for a while on the front steps, so he bade them good night. The great tapestries of trees had darkened to ghosts back at the last edge of twilight. The early moon had drenched the arches with pale blue, and weaving over the night, in and out of the gossamer rifts of moon, swept a song with more than a hint of sadness, infinitely transient, infinitely regretful. He remembered that an alumnus of the 90s had told him of one of Booth Tarkington's amusements, standing in mid-campus in the small hours and singing tenor songs to the stars, arousing mingled emotions in the couched undergraduates according to the sentiment of their moods. Now, far down the shadowy line of University Place, a white-clad phalanx broke the gloom, and marching figures, white-shirted, white-trousered, swung rhythmically up the street, with linked arms and heads thrown back. Going back, going back, going back to Nassau Hall, going back, to the best old place of all. Going back, from all this earthly ball, we'll clear the track as we go back, going back to Nassau Hall. Amory closed his eyes as the ghostly procession drew near. The song soared so high that all dropped out except the tenors, who bore the melody triumphantly past the danger point and relinquished it to the fantastic chorus. Then Amory opened his eyes, half afraid that sight would spoil the rich illusion of harmony. He sighed eagerly. There at the head of the white platoon marched Allenby, the football captain, slim and defiant, as if aware that this year the hopes of the college rested on him, that his 160 pounds were expected to dodge to victory through the heavy blue and crimson lines. Fascinated, Amory watched each rank of linked arms as it came abreast, the faces indistinct above the polo shirts, the voices blent in a paean of triumph. And then the procession passed through shadowy Campbell Arch, and the voices grew fainter as it wound eastward over the campus. The minutes passed, and Amory sat there very quietly. He regretted the rule that would forbid freshmen to be outdoors after curfew, for he wanted to ramble through the shadowy scented lanes, where Witherspoon brooded like a dark mother over Wig and Cleo, her attic children, where the black Gothic snake of Little curled down to Cuyler and Patton, these in turn flinging the mystery out over the placid slope rolling to the lake. Princeton of the daytime filtered slowly into his consciousness. West and Reunion, redolent of the 60s, 79 Hall, brick red and arrogant, Upper and Lower Pine, aristocratic Elizabethan ladies not quite content to live among shopkeepers, and topping all, climbing with clear blue aspiration, the great dreaming spires of Holder and Cleveland Towers. From the first, he loved Princeton, its lazy beauty, its half-grasped significance, the wild moonlight revel of the rushes, the handsome, prosperous big-game crowds, and under it all the air of struggle that pervaded his class. From the day when, wild-eyed and exhausted, the jerseyed freshman sat in the gymnasium and elected someone from Hill School class president, a Lawrenceville celebrity vice president, a hockey star from St. Paul's secretary, up until the end of sophomore year it never ceased. That breathless social system, that worship, seldom named, never really admitted, of the bogey big man. First it was schools, and Amory, alone from St. Regis's, watched the crowds form and widen and form again. St. Paul's, Hill, Pomfret, eating at certain tacitly reserved tables in commons, dressing in their own corners of the gymnasium, and drawing unconsciously about them a barrier of the slightly less important but socially ambitious to protect them from the friendly, rather puzzled high school element. From the moment he realized this, Amory resented social barriers as artificial distinctions made by the strong to bolster up their weak retainers and keep out the almost strong. Having decided to be one of the gods of the class, he reported for freshman football practice, but in the second week, playing quarterback, already paragraphed in corners of the Princetonian, he wrenched his knee seriously enough to put him out for the rest of the season. This forced him to retire and consider the situation. 12 Univ housed a dozen miscellaneous question marks. There were 3 or 4 inconspicuous and quite startled boys from Lawrenceville, 2 amateur wild men from a New York private school. Carrie Holiday christened them the plebeian drunks. A Jewish youth, also from New York, and, as compensation for Amory, the 2 Holidays, to whom he took an instant fancy. The Holidays were rumored twins, but really the dark-haired one, Carrie, was a year older than his blonde brother, Byrne. Carrie was tall, with humorous gray eyes and a sudden, attractive smile. He became at once the mentor of the house, reaper of ears that grew too high, censor of conceit, vendor of rare, satirical humor. Amory spread the table of their future friendship with all his ideas of what college should and did mean. Carrie, not inclined as yet to take things seriously, chided him gently for being curious at this inopportune time about the intricacies of the social system, but liked him and was both interested and amused. Byrne, fair-haired, silent, and intent, appeared in the house only as a busy apparition, gliding in quietly at night and off again in the early morning to get up his work in the library. He was out for the Princetonian, competing furiously against 40 others for the coveted first place. In December, he came down with diphtheria, and someone else won the competition. But returning to college in February, he dauntlessly went after the prize again. Necessarily, Amory's acquaintance with him was in the way of 3-minute chats, walking to and from lectures, so he failed to penetrate Byrne's one absorbing interest and find what lay beneath it. Amory was far from contented. He missed the place he had won at St. Regis's, the being known and admired. Yet Princeton stimulated him, and there were many things ahead calculated to arouse the Machiavelli latent in him, could he but insert a wedge. The upper-class clubs, concerning which he had pumped a reluctant graduate during the previous summer, excited his curiosity. Ivy, detached and breathlessly aristocratic. Cottage, an impressive melange of brilliant adventurers and well-dressed philanderers. Tiger Inn, broad-shouldered and athletic, vitalized by an honest elaboration of prep school standards. Cap and gown, anti-alcoholic, faintly religious and politically powerful, flamboyant colonial, literary quadrangle, and the dozen others varying in age and position. Anything which brought an underclassman into too glaring a light was labeled with the damning brand of running it out. The movies thrived on caustic comments, but the men who made them were generally running it out. Talking of clubs was running it out. Standing for anything very strongly, as for instance drinking parties or teetotaling, was running it out. In short, being personally conspicuous was not tolerated, and the influential man was the non-committal man, until at club elections in sophomore year everyone should be sewed up in some bag for the rest of his college career. Amory found that writing for the Nassau Literary Magazine would get him nothing, but that being on the board of the Daily Princetonian would get anyone a good deal. His vague desire to do immortal acting with the English Dramatic Association faded out when he found that the most ingenious brains and talents were concentrated upon the Triangle Club, a musical comedy organization that every year took a great Christmas trip. In the meanwhile, feeling strangely alone and restless in Commons, with new desires and ambitions stirring in his mind, he let the first term go by between an envy of the embryo successes and a puzzled fretting with Carrie as to why they were not accepted immediately among the elite of the class. Many afternoons they lounged in the windows of 12 Univet and watched the class pass to and from Commons, noting satellites already attaching themselves to the more prominent, watching the lonely grind with his hurried step and downcast eye, envying the happy security of the big school groups. "We're the damned middle class, that's what," he complained to Carrie one day as he lay stretched out on the sofa, consuming a family of Fatimas with contemplative precision. "Well, why not? We came to Princeton so we could feel that way toward the small colleges. Have it on 'em, more self-confidence, dress better, cut a swathe." "Oh, it isn't that I mind the glittering caste system," admitted Amory. "I like having a bunch of hot cats on top, but gosh, Carrie, I've got to be one of them." "But just now, Amory, you're only a sweaty bourgeois." Amory lay for a moment without speaking. "I won't be. Long," he said finally. "But I hate to get anywhere by working for it. I'll show the marks, don't you know?" Honorable scars. Carrie craned his neck suddenly at the street. "There's Languedoc, if you want to see what he looks like, and Humbird just behind." Amory rose dynamically and sought the windows. "Oh," he said, scrutinizing these worthies. "Humbird looks like a knockout, but this Languedoc, he's the rugged type, isn't he? I distrust that sort. All diamonds look big in the rough." "Well," said Carrie as the excitement subsided, "you're a literary genius. It's up to you." "I wonder," Amory paused, "if I could be? I honestly think so sometimes. That sounds like the devil, and I wouldn't say it to anybody except you." "Well, go ahead. Let your hair grow and write poems like this guy Dean Villiers in the Lit." Amory reached lazily at a pile of magazines on the table. "Read his latest effort?" "Never miss 'em. They're rare." Amory glanced through the issue. "Hello," he said in surprise. "He's a freshman, isn't he?" "Yeah. Listen to this. My God. A serving lady speaks. Black velvet trails its folds over the day. White tapers, prisoned in their silver frames, wave their thin flames like shadows in the wind. Pia, Pompia, come away." Now what the devil does that mean? It's a pantry scene. Her toes are stiffened like a stork's in flight. She's laid upon her bed, on the white sheets, her hands pressed on her smooth bust like a saint. Bella Cuniza, come into the light. My gosh, Carrie, what in hell is it all about? I swear I don't get him at all, and I'm a literary bird myself. "It's pretty tricky," said Carrie. "Only you've got to think of hearses and stale milk when you read it. That isn't as pash as some of them." Amory tossed the magazine on the table. "Well," he sighed, "I sure am up in the air. I know I'm not a regular fellow, yet I loathe anybody else that isn't. I can't decide whether to cultivate my mind and be a great dramatist, or to thumb my nose at the Golden Treasury and be a Princeton slicker." "Why decide?" suggested Carrie. "Better drift like me. I'm going to sail into prominence on Burns' coattails." "I can't drift. I want to be interested. I want to pull strings, even for somebody else, or be Princetonian chairman or Triangle president. I want to be admired, Carrie." "You're thinking too much about yourself." Amory sat up at this. "No, I'm thinking about you, too. We've got to get out and mix around the class right now when it's fun to be a snob. I'd like to bring a sardine to the prom in June, for instance, but I wouldn't do it unless I could be damn debonair about it. Introduce her to all the prize parlor snakes and the football captain and all that simple stuff." "Amory," said Carrie impatiently, "you're just going around in a circle. If you want to be prominent, get out and try for something. If you don't, just take it easy." He yawned. Come on, let's let the smoke drift off. We'll go down and watch football practice. Amory gradually accepted this point of view, decided that next fall would inaugurate his career, and relinquished himself to watching Carrie extract joy from 12 Univ. They filled the Jewish youth's bed with lemon pie. They put out the gas all over the house every night by blowing into the jet in Amory's room, to the bewilderment of Mrs. 12 and the local plumber. They set up the effects of the plebeian drunks, pictures, books, and furniture in the bathroom, to the confusion of the pair, who hazily discovered the transposition on their return from a Trenton spree. They were disappointed beyond measure when the plebeian drunks decided to take it as a joke. They played Red Dog and 21 and Jackpot from dinner to dawn, and on the occasion of one man's birthday persuaded him to buy sufficient champagne for a hilarious celebration. The donor of the party having remained sober, Carrie and Amory accidentally dropped him down 2 flights of stairs and called, shamefaced and penitent, at the infirmary all the following week. "Say, who are all these women?" demanded Carrie one day, protesting at the size of Amory's mail. "I've been looking at the postmarks lately, Farmington and Dobbs and Westover and Dana Hall. What's the idea?" Amory grinned. "All from the Twin Cities." He named them off. "There's Marilyn DeWitt. She's pretty, got a car of her own, and that's damn convenient. There's Sally Weatherby. She's getting too fat. There's Myra St. Clair. She's an old flame, easy to kiss if you like it." "What line do you throw 'em?" demanded Carrie. "I've tried everything, and the mad wags aren't even afraid of me." "You're the nice boy type," suggested Amory. "That's just it. Mother always feels the girl is safe if she's with me. Honestly, it's annoying. If I start to hold somebody's hand, they laugh at me and let me, just as if it wasn't part of them. As soon as I get hold of a hand, they sort of disconnect it from the rest of them." "Sulk," suggested Amory. "Tell him you're wild and have him reform you. Go home furious. Come back in half an hour. Startle him." Carrie shook his head. "No chance. I wrote a St. Timothy girl a really loving letter last year. In one place I got rattled and said, 'My God, how I love you.' She took a nail scissors, clipped out the 'My God,' and showed the rest of the letter all over school. Doesn't work at all. I'm just good old Carrie and all that rot." Amory smiled and tried to picture himself as good old Amory. He failed completely. February dripped snow and rain, the cyclonic freshman mid-years passed, and life in 12 Univ continued interesting if not purposeful. Once a day, Amory indulged in a club sandwich, cornflakes, and julienne potatoes at Joe's, accompanied usually by Carrie or Alec Connage. The latter was a quiet, rather aloof slicker from Hotchkiss, who lived next door and shared the same enforced singleness as Amory, due to the fact that his entire class had gone to Yale. Joe's was unaesthetic and faintly unsanitary, but a limitless charge account could be opened there, a convenience that Amory appreciated. His father had been experimenting with mining stocks and, in consequence, his allowance, while liberal, was not at all what he had expected. Joe's had the additional advantage of seclusion from curious upper-class eyes, so at 4 each afternoon, Amory, accompanied by friend or book, went up to experiment with his digestion. One day in March, finding that all the tables were occupied, he slipped into a chair opposite a freshman who bent intently over a book at the last table. They nodded briefly. For 20 minutes, Amory sat consuming bacon buns and reading Mrs. Warren's Profession. He had discovered Shaw quite by accident while browsing in the library during mid-years. The other freshman, also intent on his volume, meanwhile did away with a trio of chocolate malted milks. By and by, Amory's eyes wandered curiously to his fellow luncher's book. He spelled out the name and title upside down. Marpessa, by Stephen Phillips. This meant nothing to him, his metrical education having been confined to such Sunday classics as Come Into the Garden, Maud, and what morsels of Shakespeare and Milton had been recently forced upon him. Moved to address his vis-a-vis, he simulated interest in his book for a moment, and then exclaimed aloud as if involuntarily, "Ah, great stuff." The other freshman looked up and Amory registered artificial embarrassment. "Are you referring to your bacon buns?" His cracked, kindly voice went well with the large spectacles and the impression of a voluminous keenness that he gave. "No," Amory answered. "I was referring to Bernard Shaw." He turned the book around in explanation. "I've never read any Shaw. I've always meant to." The boy paused and then continued. "Did you ever read Stephen Phillips? Or do you like poetry?" "Yes, indeed," Amory affirmed eagerly. "I've never read much of Phillips, though." He had never heard of any Phillips except the late David Graham. "It's pretty fair, I think. Of course he's a Victorian." They sallied into a discussion of poetry, in the course of which they introduced themselves, and Amory's companion proved to be none other than that awful highbrow, Thomas Park Dean Villiers, who signed the passionate love poems in the Lit. He was, perhaps, 19, with stooped shoulders, pale blue eyes, and, as Amory could tell from his general appearance, without much conception of social competition and such phenomena of absorbing interest. Still, he liked books, and it seemed forever since Amory had met anyone who did. If only that St. Paul's crowd at the next table would not mistake him for a bird, too. He would enjoy the encounter tremendously. They didn't seem to be noticing, so he let himself go, discussed books by the dozens, books he had read about, books he had never heard of, rattling off lists of titles with the facility of a Brentano's clerk. D'Invilliers was partially taken in and wholly delighted. In a good-natured way, he had almost decided that Princeton was one part deadly Philistines and one part deadly grinds, and to find a person who could mention Keats without stammering, yet evidently washed his hands, was rather a treat. "Ever read any Oscar Wilde?" he asked. "No. Who wrote it?" "It's a man. Don't you know?" "Oh, surely." A faint chord was struck in Amory's memory. "Wasn't the comic opera on Patience written about him?" "Yes, that's the fella. I've just finished a book of his, The Picture of Dorian Gray, and I certainly wish you'd read it. You'd like it. You can borrow it if you want to." "Why, I'd like it a lot. Thanks." "No, don't you want to come up to the room? I've got a few other books." Amory hesitated, glanced at the St. Paul's group. One of them was the magnificent, exquisite Humbird, and he considered how determinate the addition of this friend would be. He never got to the stage of making them and getting rid of them. He was not hard enough for that. So he measured Thomas Park D'Invilliers' undoubted attractions and value against the menace of cold eyes behind tortoise-rimmed spectacles that he fancied glared from the next table. "Yes, I'll go." So he found Dorian Gray and the mystic and somber Dolores and the Belle Dame sans merci. For a month was keen on naught else. The world became pale and interesting, and he tried hard to look at Princeton through the satiated eyes of Oscar Wilde and Swinburne, or Fingal O'Flaherty and Algernon Charles, as he called them in precious jest. He read enormously every night. Shaw, Chesterton, Barrie, Pinero, Yeats, Synge, Ernest Dowson, Arthur Symons, Keats, Sudermann, Robert Hugh Benson, the Savoy operas, just a heterogeneous mixture, for he suddenly discovered that he had read nothing for years. Tom D'Invilliers became at first an occasion rather than a friend. Amory saw him about once a week, and together they gilded the ceiling of Tom's room and decorated the walls with imitation tapestry, bought at an auction, tall candlesticks and figured curtains. Amory liked him for being clever and literary without effeminacy or affectation. In fact, Amory did most of the strutting and tried painfully to make every remark an epigram, than which, if one is content with ostensible epigrams, there are many feats harder. 12. Univet was amused. Carrie read Dorian Gray and simulated Lord Henry, following Amory about, addressing him as Dorian, and pretending to encourage in him wicked fancies and attenuated tendencies to ennui. When he carried it into Commons, to the amazement of the others at table, Amory became furiously embarrassed, and after that made epigrams only before D'Invilliers or a convenient mirror. One day, Tom and Amory tried reciting their own and Lord Dunsany's poems to the music of Carrie's graphophone. "Chant!" cried Tom. "Don't recite, chant!" Amory, who was performing, looked annoyed and claimed that he needed a record with less piano in it. Carrie thereupon rolled on the floor in stifled laughter. "Put on hearts and flowers," he howled. "Oh, my lord, I'm going to cast a kitten." "Shut off the damn graphophone," Amory cried, rather red in the face. "I'm not giving an exhibition." In the meanwhile, Amory delicately kept trying to awaken a sense of the social system in D'Invilliers, for he knew that this poet was really more conventional than he, and needed merely watered hair, a smaller range of conversation, and a darker brown hat to become quite regular. But the liturgy of Livingston collars and dark ties fell on heedless ears. In fact, D'Invilliers faintly resented his efforts. So Amory confined himself to calls once a week and brought him occasionally to 12 Univae. This caused mild titters among the other freshmen, who called them Dr. Johnson and Boswell. Alec Connage, another frequent visitor, liked him in a vague way, but was afraid of him as a highbrow. Carrie, who saw through his poetic patter to the solid, almost respectable depths within, was immensely amused, and would have him recite poetry by the hour, while he lay with closed eyes on Amory's sofa and listened. "Asleep or waking is it, for her neck, kissed over close, wears yet a purple speck, wherein the pained blood falters and goes out, soft and stung softly, fairer for a fleck." "That's good," Carrie would say softly. "It pleases the elder Holiday. That's a great poet, I guess." Tom, delighted at an audience, would ramble through the poems and ballades until Carrie and Amory knew them almost as well as he. Amory took to writing poetry on spring afternoons in the gardens of the big estates near Princeton, while swans made effective atmosphere in the artificial pools and slow clouds sailed harmoniously above the willows. May came too soon, and suddenly unable to bear walls, he wandered the campus at all hours through starlight and rain. A damp, symbolic interlude. The night mist fell. From the moon it rolled, clustered about the spires and towers, and then settled below them, so that the dreaming peaks were still in lofty aspiration toward the sky. Figures that dotted the day like ants now brushed along as shadowy ghosts in and out of the foreground. The Gothic halls and cloisters were infinitely more mysterious as they loomed suddenly out of the darkness, outlined each by myriad faint squares of yellow light. Indefinitely from somewhere a bell boomed the quarter hour, and Amory, pausing by the sundial, stretched himself out full length on the damp grass. The cool bathed his eyes and slowed the flight of time, time that had crept so insidiously through the lazy April afternoons, seemed so intangible in the long spring twilights. Evening after evening, the senior singing had drifted over the campus in melancholy beauty, and through the shell of his undergraduate consciousness had broken a deep and reverent devotion to the gray walls and Gothic peaks, and all they symbolized as warehouses of dead ages. The tower that in view of his window sprang upward grew into a spire, yearning higher until its uppermost tip was half invisible against the morning skies, gave him the first sense of the transiency and unimportance of the campus figures except as holders of the apostolic succession. He liked knowing that Gothic architecture, with its upward trend, was peculiarly appropriate to universities, and the idea became personal to him. The silent stretches of green, the quiet halls with an occasional late-burning scholastic light held his imagination in a strong grasp, and the chastity of the spire became a symbol of this perception. "Damn it all," he whispered aloud, wetting his hands in the damp and running them through his hair. "Next year, I work." Yet he knew that where now the spirit of spires and towers made him dreamily acquiescent, it would then overawe him. Where now he realized only his own inconsequence, effort would make him aware of his own impotency and insufficiency. The college dreamed on, awake. He felt a nervous excitement that might have been the very throb of its slow heart. It was a stream where he was to throw a stone whose faint ripple would be vanishing almost as it left his hand. As yet, he had given nothing. He had taken nothing. A belated freshman, his oilskin slicker rasping loudly, slushed along the soft path. A voice from somewhere called the inevitable formula, "Stick out your head," below an unseen window. 100 little sounds of the current drifting on under the fog pressed in finally on his consciousness. "Oh, God," he cried suddenly, and started at the sound of his voice in the stillness. The rain dripped on. A minute longer he lay without moving, his hands clenched. Then he sprang to his feet and gave his clothes a tentative pat. "I'm very damn wet," he said aloud to the sundial. Historical. The war began in the summer following his freshman year. Beyond a sporting interest in the German dash for Paris, the whole affair failed either to thrill or interest him. With the attitude he might have held toward an amusing melodrama, he hoped it would be long and bloody. If it had not continued, he would have felt like an irate ticket holder at a prize fight where the principals refused to mix it up. That was his total reaction. "Ha-ha, Hortense! All right, ponies, shake it up. Hey, ponies, how about easing up on that crap game and shaking a mean hip? Hey, ponies!" The coach fumed helplessly, the Triangle Club president, glowering with anxiety, varied between furious bursts of authority and fits of temperamental lassitude, when he sat spiritless and wondered how the devil the show was ever going on tour by Christmas. "All right, we'll take the pirate song." The ponies took last drags at their cigarettes and slumped into place. The leading lady rushed into the foreground, setting his hands and feet in an atmospheric mince. And as the coach clapped and stamped and tumped and da-da'd, they hashed out a dance. A great, seething anthill was the Triangle Club. It gave a musical comedy every year, traveling with cast, chorus, orchestra, and scenery all through Christmas vacation. The play and music were the work of undergraduates, and the club itself was the most influential of institutions, over 300 men competing for it every year. Amory, after an easy victory in the first sophomore Princetonian competition, stepped into a vacancy of the cast as Boiling Oil, a pirate lieutenant. Every night for the last week they had rehearsed Ha-Ha Hortense in the casino, from 2 in the afternoon until 8 in the morning, sustained by dark and powerful coffee, and sleeping in lectures through the interim. A rare scene, the casino. A big, barn-like auditorium, dotted with boys as girls, boys as pirates, boys as babies. The scenery in course of being violently set up. The spotlight man rehearsing by throwing weird shafts into angry eyes. Overall, the constant tuning of the orchestra or the cheerful tumpty-tump of a triangle tune. The boy who writes the lyrics stands in the corner, biting a pencil with 20 minutes to think of an encore. The business manager argues with the secretary as to how much money can be spent on those damn milkmaid costumes. The old graduate, president in '98, perches on a box and thinks how much simpler it was in his day. How a triangle show ever got off was a mystery, but it was a riotous mystery anyway, whether or not one did enough service to wear a little gold triangle on his watch chain. Ha-Ha Hortense was written over 6 times and had the names of 9 collaborators on the program. All triangle shows started by being something different, not just a regular musical comedy. But when the several authors, the president, the coach, and the faculty committee finished with it, there remained just the old reliable triangle show with the old reliable jokes and the star comedian who got expelled or sick or something just before the trip, and the dark-whiskered man in the pony ballet, who absolutely won't shave twice a day, doggone it. There was one brilliant place in Ha-Ha Hortense. It is a Princeton tradition that whenever a Yale man who is a member of the widely advertised Skull and Bones hears the sacred name mentioned, he must leave the room. It is also a tradition that the members are invariably successful in later life, amassing fortunes or votes or coupons or whatever they choose to amass. Therefore, at each performance of Ha-Ha Hortense, half a dozen seats were kept from sale and occupied by 6 of the worst-looking vagabonds that could be hired from the streets, further touched up by the triangle makeup man. At the moment in the show where Firebrand, the pirate chief, pointed at his black flag and said, I am a Yale graduate. Note my skull and bones. At this very moment, the 6 vagabonds were instructed to rise conspicuously and leave the theater with looks of deep melancholy and an injured dignity. It was claimed, though never proved, that on one occasion the hired Ellis were swelled by one of the real thing. They played through vacation to the fashionable of 8 cities. Amory liked Louisville and Memphis best. These knew how to meet strangers, furnished extraordinary punch, and flaunted an astonishing array of feminine beauty. Chicago he approved for a certain verve that transcended its loud accent. However, it was a Yale town, and as the Yale Glee Club was expected in a week, the Triangle received only divided homage. In Baltimore, Princeton was at home, and everyone fell in love. There was a proper consumption of strong waters all along the line. One man invariably went on the stage highly stimulated, claiming that his particular interpretation of the part required it. There were 3 private cars. However, no one slept except in the 3rd car, which was called the animal car, and where were herded the spectacled windjammers of the orchestra. Everything was so hurried that there was no time to be bored. But when they arrived in Philadelphia, with vacation nearly over, there was rest in getting out of the heavy atmosphere of flowers and grease paint, and the ponies took off their corsets with abdominal pains and sighs of relief. When the disbanding came, Amory set out post-haste for Minneapolis, for Sally Weatherby's cousin, Isabel Borge, was coming to spend the winter in Minneapolis while her parents went abroad. He remembered Isabel only as a little girl with whom he had played sometimes when he first went to Minneapolis. She had gone to Baltimore to live, but since then she had developed a past. Amory was in full stride, confident, nervous, and jubilant. Scurrying back to Minneapolis to see a girl he had known as a child seemed the interesting and romantic thing to do, so without compunction, he wired his mother not to expect him, sat in the train, and thought about himself for 36 hours. Petting. On the Triangle trip, Amory had come into constant contact with that great current American phenomenon, the petting party. None of the Victorian mothers, and most of the mothers were Victorian, had any idea how casually their daughters were accustomed to be kissed. "Servant girls are that way," says Mrs. Houston Carmelite to her popular daughter. "They are kissed first and proposed to afterward." But the popular daughter becomes engaged every 6 months between 16 and 22, when she arranges a match with young Hamble of Campbell and Hamble, who fatuously considers himself her first love, and between engagements the PD she is selected by the cut-in system at dances, which favors the survival of the fittest, has other sentimental last kisses in the moonlight, or the firelight, or the outer darkness. Amory saw girls doing things that even in his memory would have been impossible. Eating 3 o'clock, after-dance suppers in impossible cafes, talking of every side of life with an air half of earnestness, half of mockery, yet with a furtive excitement that Amory considered stood for a real moral letdown. But he never realized how widespread it was until he saw the cities between New York and Chicago as one vast juvenile intrigue. Afternoon at the plaza, with winter twilight hovering outside and faint drums downstairs. They strut and fret in the lobby, taking another cocktail, scrupulously attired and waiting. Then the swinging doors revolve and 3 bundles of fur mince in. The theater comes afterward. Then a table at the midnight frolic. Of course, Mother will be along there, but she will serve only to make things more secretive and brilliant as she sits in solitary state at the deserted table and thinks such entertainments as this are not half so bad as they are painted, only rather wearying. But the PD is in love again. It was odd, wasn't it? That though there was so much room left in the taxi, the PD and the boy from Williams were somehow crowded out and had to go in a separate car. Odd. Didn't you notice how flushed the PD was when she arrived just 7 minutes late? But the PD gets away with it. The belle had become the flirt. The flirt had become the baby vamp. The belle had 5 or 6 callers every afternoon. If the PD, by some strange accident, has 2, it is made pretty uncomfortable for the one who hasn't a date with her. The belle was surrounded by a dozen men in the intermissions between dances. Try to find the PD between dances. Just try to find her. The same girl, deep in an atmosphere of jungle music and the questioning of moral codes. Amory found it rather fascinating to feel that any popular girl he met before 8, he might quite possibly kiss before 12. "Why on earth are we here?" he asked the girl with the green combs one night as they sat in someone's limousine outside the country club in Louisville. "I don't know. I'm just full of the devil." "Let's be frank. We'll never see each other again. I wanted to come out here with you because I thought you were the best-looking girl in sight. You really don't care whether you ever see me again, do you?" "No. But is this your line for every girl? What have I done to deserve it?" "And you didn't feel tired dancing or want a cigarette or any of the things you said? You just wanted to be—" "Oh, let's go in," she interrupted. "If you want to analyze, let's not talk about it." When the hand-knit, sleeveless jerseys were stylish, Amory, in a burst of inspiration, named them petting shirts. The name traveled from coast to coast on the lips of parlor snakes and PDs. Descriptive. Amory was now 18 years old, just under 6 feet tall and exceptionally, but not conventionally, handsome. He had rather a young face, the ingenuousness of which was marred by the penetrating green eyes, fringed with long, dark eyelashes. He lacked somehow that intense animal magnetism that so often accompanies beauty in men or women. His personality seemed rather a mental thing, and it was not in his power to turn it on and off like a water faucet. But people never forgot his face. Isabelle. She paused at the top of the staircase. The sensations attributed to divers on springboards, leading ladies on opening nights, and lumpy, husky young men on the day of the big game crowded through her. She should have descended to a burst of drums or a discordant blend of themes from Thais and Carmen. She had never been so curious about her appearance. She had never been so satisfied with it. She had been 16 years old for 6 months. "Isabelle," called her cousin Sally from the doorway of the dressing room. "I'm ready." She caught a slight lump of nervousness in her throat. "I had to send back to the house for another pair of slippers. It'll be just a minute." Isabelle started toward the dressing room for a last peek in the mirror, but something decided her to stand there and gaze down the broad stairs of the Minnehaha Club. They curved tantalizingly, and she could catch just a glimpse of 2 pairs of masculine feet in the hall below. Pump-shod in uniform black, they gave no hint of identity, but she wondered eagerly if one pair were attached to Amory Blaine. This young man, not as yet encountered, had nevertheless taken up a considerable part of her day, the first day of her arrival. Coming up in the machine from the station, Sally had volunteered, amid a rain of question, comment, revelation, and exaggeration. "You remember Amory Blaine, of course. Well, he's simply mad to see you again. He stayed over a day from college, and he's coming tonight. He's heard so much about you, says he remembers your eyes." This had pleased Isabelle. It put them on equal terms, although she was quite capable of staging her own romances, with or without advance advertising. But following her happy tremble of anticipation came a sinking sensation that made her ask, "How do you mean he's heard about me? What sort of things?" Sally smiled. She felt rather in the capacity of a showman with her more exotic cousin. "He knows you're considered beautiful and all that." She paused. "And I guess he knows you've been kissed." At this, Isabelle's little fist had clenched suddenly under the fur robe. She was accustomed to be thus followed by her desperate past, and it never failed to rouse in her the same feeling of resentment. Yet, in a strange town, it was an advantageous reputation. She was a speed, was she? Well, let them find out. Out of the window, Isabelle watched the snow glide by in the frosty morning. It was ever so much colder here than in Baltimore. She had not remembered. The glass of the side door was iced. The windows were shirred with snow in the corners. Her mind played still with one subject. Did he dress like that boy there, who walked calmly down a bustling business street in moccasins and winter carnival costume? How very Western. Of course he wasn't that way. He went to Princeton, was a sophomore or something. Really, she had no distinct idea of him. An ancient snapshot she had preserved in an old Kodak book had impressed her by the big eyes, which she had probably grown up to by now. However, in the last month, when her winter visit to Sally had been decided on, he had assumed the proportions of a worthy adversary. Children, most astute of matchmakers, plot their campaigns quickly, and Sally had played a clever correspondence sonata to Isabel's excitable temperament. Isabel had been for some time capable of very strong, if very transient emotions. They drew up at a spreading white stone building, set back from the snowy street. Mrs. Weatherby greeted her warmly, and her various younger cousins were produced from the corners where they skulked politely. Isabel met them tactfully. At her best, she allied all with whom she came in contact, except older girls and some women. All the impressions she made were conscious. The half-dozen girls she renewed acquaintance with that morning were all rather impressed, and as much by her direct personality as by her reputation. Amory Blaine was an open subject, evidently a bit light of love, neither popular nor unpopular. Every girl there seemed to have had an affair with him at some time or other, but no one volunteered any really useful information. He was going to fall for her. Sally had published that information to her young set, and they were retailing it back to Sally as fast as they set eyes on Isabel. Isabel resolved secretly that she would, if necessary, force herself to like him. She owed it to Sally. Suppose she were terribly disappointed. Sally had painted him in such glowing colors. He was good-looking, sort of distinguished when he wants to be, had a line, and was properly inconstant. In fact, he summed up all the romance that her age and environment led her to desire. She wondered if those were his dancing shoes that fox-trotted tentatively around the soft rug below. All impressions and, in fact, all ideas were extremely kaleidoscopic to Isabel. She had that curious mixture of the social and the artistic temperaments found often in two classes, society women and actresses. Her education, or rather her sophistication, had been absorbed from the boys who had dangled on her favor. Her tact was instinctive, and her capacity for love affairs was limited only by the number of the susceptible within telephone distance. Flirt smiled from her large black-brown eyes and shone through her intense physical magnetism. So she waited at the head of the stairs that evening while slippers were fetched. Just as she was growing impatient, Sally came out of the dressing room, beaming with her accustomed good nature and high spirits, and together they descended to the floor below, while the shifting searchlight of Isabel's mind flashed on two ideas. She was glad she had high color tonight, and she wondered if he danced well. Downstairs, in the club's great room, she was surrounded for a moment by the girls she had met in the afternoon. Then she heard Sally's voice repeating a cycle of names, and found herself bowing to a sextet of black and white, terribly stiff, vaguely familiar figures. The name Blaine figured somewhere, but at first she could not place him. A very confused, very juvenile moment of awkward backings and bumpings followed, and everyone found himself talking to the person he least desired to. Isabel maneuvered herself and Froggy Parker, freshman at Harvard, with whom she had once played hopscotch, to a seat on the stairs. A humorous reference to the past was all she needed. The things Isabel could do socially with one idea were remarkable. First, she repeated it rapturously in an enthusiastic contralto with a soupçon of Southern accent. Then she held it off at a distance and smiled at it, her wonderful smile. Then she delivered it in variations and played a sort of mental catch with it. All this in the nominal form of dialogue. Froggy was fascinated and quite unconscious that this was being done, not for him, but for the green eyes that glistened under the shining, carefully watered hair. A little to her left, for Isabel had discovered Amory. As an actress, even in the fullest flush of her own conscious magnetism, gets a deep impression of most of the people in the front row, so Isabel sized up her antagonist. First, he had auburn hair, and from her feeling of disappointment, she knew that she had expected him to be dark, and "Will you tell me? Afterward?" she half whispered. He nodded. We'll sit out. Isabel nodded. Did anyone ever tell you you have keen eyes? She said. Amory attempted to make them look even keener. He fancied, but he was not sure, that her foot had just touched his under the table. But it might possibly have been only the table leg. It was so hard to tell. Still, it thrilled him. He wondered quickly if there would be any difficulty in securing the little den upstairs.